corners of his luminous brown eyes. He had a broad forehead, prominent nose, short, thick neck, big shoulders, and deep chest, and stood erect as the West Point cadet he once had been. Because he thought he might end this day as General Grant's prisoner, Lee was not wearing his usual gray sack coat. To represent his thousands of mud-caked scarecrows who were still ready to fight on, this morning Lee was resplendent in a double-breasted gray dress coat with gilt buttons. Around his waist was a deep red silk sash, and over that was a sword belt of gold braid. At his side hung a dress sword in a leather and gilt scabbard. On the blade was an inscription in French. Aide-toi et Dieu t'aidera. Help yourself and God will help you. Standing on this hillside, Lee knew the consequences of the choice he must soon make. In the past 48 hours, Ulysses S. Grant had opened a correspondence with him, sending messages under flags of truce, urging him to surrender this army. If he surrendered these men now, the other armies of the Confederacy might stagger on briefly, but his action would mean the end of the war. For Lee, there was a special problem faced by no other Confederate officer. He was not only the field commander of this army, but he was the general in command of all Confederate forces. If the rider coming back through the woods brought him reason to think he could get his men through to Johnston's army in North Carolina and assume direct command of both armies, it might be his duty to continue the bloodshed. He had produced near miracles before. If he could fashion one more sharp blow, it might ease the terms of the inevitable surrender. Everything was converging. 2 days before, he had sent a message to his son, Major General W. H. Fitzhugh Lee, a young cavalry commander who had served in the United States Army before the war. Keep your command together and in good spirits, General. Don't let it think of surrender. I will get you out of this. Earlier in the war, he had written this same son, whose nickname was Rooney, "If victorious, we have everything to live for in the future. If defeated, nothing will be left for us to live for." All the hopes were crashing now in a way that affected his flesh and blood. Rooney was up there in the fighting in those misty trees. So was another Major General Fitzhugh Lee, his nephew. His oldest son, Major General Custis Lee, a West Pointer like himself, had been missing since Sailor's Creek. There were rumors that he was dead. His youngest son, Captain Robert E. Lee, Jr., had been missing in action for a week. Those were the bonds of family, but this entire army was filled with love for Lee. They were proud of his appearance, proud of his brilliant leadership, but their hearts went out to him because he shared their risks and hardships, constantly showing them how much he admired them and appreciated their sacrifices. Thousands of them referred to him as Uncle Robert. His soldiers saw their cause embodied in him. One of his generals told him, "You are the country to these men." In the horrendous confusion of the defeat at Sailor's Creek, Lee had cantered into the midst of his scattered troops. Facing the enemy, he grabbed up a red Confederate battle flag and held it high in the dusk, the banner waving against the flames of destroyed supplies. A staff officer told what happened next. The sight of him aroused a tumult. Fierce cries resounded on all sides, and, with hands clenched violently and raised aloft, the men called on him to lead them against the enemy. "It's General Lee!" "Uncle Robert! Where's the man who won't follow Uncle Robert?" I heard on all sides. The swarthy faces, full of dirt and courage, lit up every instant by the glare of the burning wagons. Lieutenant Colonel Venable emerged from the misty woods and rode up the slope to Lee. He had an oral message from Major General Gordon on the front line. "I have fought my corps to a frazzle, and I fear I can do nothing unless I am heavily supported by Longstreet's corps." Longstreet's corps. Lee knew that Gordon could not have the reinforcements he said he needed to break through. They were committed and fighting as the Army's rear guard, holding off twice their numbers. There were no reserves left, and no hope of breaking out. Lee said in his deep voice, addressing no one, then there is nothing left me but to go and see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths." His words broke the respectful silence and dignified bearing of the officers near him. Years of dedication, of comrades killed, had come to naught in an instant. "Convulsed with passionate grief," an artilleryman said, "many were the wild words we spoke as we stood around him." As the fog began to lift and Lee finally could see his last battlefield, he spoke again, this time in what an officer beside him called a voice filled with hopeless sadness. "How easily I could be rid of this," Lee said, again addressing no one, "and be at rest. I have only to ride along the line and all will be over." He meant that it would be easy to commit suicide by riding in front of his lines, drawing enemy fire. Lee crossed his arms over his chest, his hands gripping his biceps. An inward battle was being fought to a decision. Finally he said with a deep sigh, "But it is our duty to live. What will become of the women and children of the South if we are not here to protect them?" Amidst arrangements for a temporary ceasefire while he went to confer with Grant, Lee was presented with a dramatic last-ditch suggestion. It came from Brigadier General E. Porter Alexander, the young chief of Longstreet's artillery. Lee had returned from his hilltop vantage point to the simple headquarters of a few tents and wagons where he had spent the night. Alexander came walking through the headquarters area, unaware that Lee had decided to meet with Grant. As he had done so often with so many officers, Lee reviewed the battlefield situation with Alexander, and then said, giving no hint of his decision, "What have we got to do today?" Lee's motives in doing this throughout the war were twofold. He wanted to make sure that no alternate plan escaped him, and it was also a form of Socratic teaching, making younger leaders learn by asking them what they would do if they were in his place. Instead of surrendering, Alexander replied, "Let these loyal thousands of excellent soldiers slip away through the woods, singly or in small groups. Most of them could sneak through the Union lines today or tonight. Then they could make their way to their home states. The Army of Northern Virginia had units from places as distant as Florida and Texas, and continue the war as guerrillas." Lee crushed this idea in a few words. "If I took your advice, the men would be without rations and under no control of officers. They would be compelled to rob and steal in order to live. They would become mere bands of marauders, and the enemy's cavalry would pursue them and overrun many sections they may never have occasion to visit. We would bring on a state of affairs it would take the country years to recover from." Although Lee meant the South when he said the country, he was doing something for which the North as well as the South had reason to thank him, even before he went to see Grant. The shooting stopped all around the defensive positions into which Lee's men had moved and along the Union lines encircling them. Some of the Confederates knew what was happening, others guessed, and thousands expected to go on fighting later in the day. They had seen flags of truce before. From the Union lines, the hopeless position of Lee's army was apparent to every Federal soldier. Like the men opposing them, they kept their weapons at their sides. It was too soon to celebrate, but they had no doubt that the end was at hand. A soldier from New Hampshire sat on a slope with his comrades looking over at the surrounded and greatly outnumbered Confederates, and later remembered how they pitied and sympathized with these courageous Southern men who had fought for 4 long and dreary years, all so stubbornly, so bravely, and so well, and now, whipped, beaten, completely used up, were finally at our mercy. It was pitiful, sad, hard, and seemed to us altogether too bad. Among the mounted messengers cantering around the wooded countryside carrying white flags, one came to Lee's headquarters with an entirely personal message. His son, Major General Custis Lee, was safe and unharmed, a prisoner in Union hands. The Federal officer who sent this news through the lines was Brigadier General Lawrence Williams. His mother and Lee's wife were first cousins. His name summoned memories of the way this war had ripped the fabric of relationships. Lawrence's